The problem is that with the governments, all governments, that they are not consistent. If you say to Hania that in 48 hours he'll find a place in a grave and then you don't do it, or you just say upfront that you will not invade Gaza. So, I mean, what are the other options? So you're just limiting yourself. You're just putting nails on your own feet. Never has been a discussion or I think a real discussion in the government or in governmental areas about what would be Israel's reaction if Hezbollah began, let's say, shooting, or again kidnapping one of our soldiers in the north. Would we be ready to go inside? How would our deterrence work? How would our deterrence work with Syria? And this is, I mean, these are facts that we have to sit and try to crystallize, because otherwise we will be all the time surprised. We'll be taken by surprise. What would happen tomorrow if Sisi is killed? He has been, I mean, he has been the victim, or not the victim. He has been twice targeted by terrorists from his own army. Now, what happens? I mean, we have opened the Sinai for the whole Egyptian army. The Egyptian army is in Sinai, so you have two armies there. What do you do? What happens in Jordan? And things that have to. I mean, these are things basic things that we have to decide upon ourselves. Anyway, this is enough. There's enough room for thinking. And if there are any questions, we're open. Please do. Try to make it short so we can no lectures.
Quick and short question. Could Israel not have used the opportunity while Hezbollah was involved in the war in Syria to create a pretext and attack the strongholds in Lebanon, thereby removing the threats of 100,000 rockets aimed at Israel? And also, are we paying a very heavy price by releasing one of our kidnapped soldiers or citizen or body parts to the enemy in order to, is that a form of appeasement? Can it be stopped? Can it be reversed? Thank you.
First of all, I think on Hezbollah, again here, the question is pragmatism and radicalism. And I'm to blame for that because of the scene of generalization. We live in a world that already has all kinds of rules of the game that we have accepted. And before you break a certain rule of the game, you have to think many, many times about the implications of doing something like that. According to the rules of the game that has been prevailing between us and Hezbollah for the last 11 years or more, 12 years actually, we don't carry out attacks in Lebanon. Okay? This is a rule of the game. We operate, we fly over Lebanon, we do all kinds of things in Lebanon that they don't like, but we don't carry out attacks. And in return, Hezbollah is supposed they can have more weapons, but their weapons should be left at a certain level of capabilities. Okay? Now, the question of, maybe it's not a wise idea to stick to these rules of the game, but these are the rules of the game that we abide by. And there was sometimes a logic of letting these weapons rotten if there's no eruption, so on and so forth, but that was left. Now, what we are witnessing today is an attempt by the Iranians and Hezbollah to change the rules of the game on their initiative. And this change is transparent through the effort to build in Lebanon, not outside of Lebanon, to build in Lebanon a factory that would enable Hezbollah to improve the capabilities of their weapons and to turn them into precise rockets and not just statistical rockets. Okay? Israel has made it clear that it's not going to accept this change in the rules of the game. And this is the issue that is today at such a high stake. Because it seems that Hezbollah insists on doing that. And those flights that everybody was talking about the last few days, the civilian flights that brought with them all kinds of capabilities into Lebanon, most probably was about bringing some stuff to those new facilities that they want to use in order to produce this kind of weapons. The reason they did it is not that they want to change the rule of the game because they understand there's a risk with it. The reason they did it is because they failed in changing the situation without building these facilities inside Lebanon. They are trying to build them all the time in Syria. And as you probably hear in the news, we keep bombing them. So they have a difficulty in developing the capability to upgrade their weapons. And that's the battle we are witnessing right now. I think in this battle, Israel is very decisive and resolute. We don't let this happen. And that's the 202 attacks that the army was speaking about yesterday. Sorry? 3 after yesterday. Yes.
Who counts? Who counts?
Those 203 attacks are meant to prevent that from happening. So there's a battle. So it's not true that what you're saying that we are ready to live with it. We are ready to live as long as the weapons that Hezbollah has are statistical weapons. Now, between me and you, when you have more than 100,000 rockets that are statistical, even if you make the arithmetic
Combination.
Calculation, then you get to the conclusion that one of them may hit the target. Okay, so you should be very cautious about it anyhow. But this is the battle that is going on.
Okay, just concerning to your question, just relating to your question, Cooper has given you the Israeli point of view. The Hezbollah point of view was exactly what you think. They thought all the time that Israel would use the situation where most of the fighters of Hezbollah are fighting inside Syria, the most experienced one. So they had to recover and to enlist, to mobilize, to recruit new recruits between 16 and 18 years of age, train them in Baalbek, and send them to the south in order just to fill the positions and in case Israel would attack. Another thing that they did is what they call the Murabba Amni. This is the area where they are in Beirut, in the Dahia. There it was fortified much more than it was in the past, and they were all the time, alert, saying that Israel would attack them imminently. So this is the way they thought. From our point of view, it is a little bit different. Martin.
I want to sort of pull us back a bit to the analogy or the comparison. Most historians would agree by consensus that Hitler not only could not be appeased, he couldn't be deterred. And an enemy who can't be appeased and who can't be deterred has to be destroyed. So I'm asking you, looking across the array of Israel's foes, do you see any enemies who can't be deterred and that Israel should plan ultimately for their destruction?
Anyone want to take that?
Okay. Look, basically, if you do remember, 1992 intelligence officers, not all of them, were against killing Hussein Moussaoui, at the time the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Abbas Moussaoui. And Abbas Moussaoui was replaced by Nasrallah. The bad guy was replaced by a worse guy. So this is what you have. As I said, we live in a bad neighborhood. I don't know if tomorrow, if Hassan Nasrallah is out, then we will have somebody who will be more lenient to speak to us. Look at what happened in Hamas. The change of leadership hasn't brought any change in the way they think about peace. There's now the leader of Hamas is some guy, a guy who spent some years in Israel. He believes that he understands the Israeli mentality, and this is what he's doing there. He is playing with us. Now, if we kill him, I mean, one of the targeted people, then do you think that Hamas will be different? No. It's different. It's in their ideology. We are facing radical Islam, political Islam, who is refusing. We have to put it in our mind. Who is refusing the existence of an entity who's not Muslim. They did all what they could in Lebanon to destroy Lebanon. And Lebanon today is no more the Lebanon we know. They are doing, if they could, they could have done the same here. Faisal Husseini, as Cooper said, we're talking about the Trojan horse. So we have to be alert all the time, and our deterrence is in our force, in our strengths. If we don't believe in that, and if we don't work in this avenue, then the whole dams are open. We can just take our luggage and go back from whoever they came from, any place.
There's no going back.
Excuse me, I'll give an answer to your question. I think one of the cases where I'll give an answer to your question, and this is not on. One of the cases where we saw even the Islamic Republic being affected very strongly in its calculations, in essence, changing its policy because of the overwhelming force used against it, was a decision of Khomeini to stop the Iran-Iraq war. So I would carefully study that little piece of history, and I think it would yield an analysis that would say, if the other side is convinced that he may actually be destroyed, that he will lose his regime, he may change his policy. But that requires overwhelming force and an ability to convince them that that's what you're going to do. That is not easy. That is not easy in the ethos of Western warfare, but it may be necessary in order to get them to fundamentally shift. I'll say something else. The Iranians are increasingly involved in warfare in more and more remote areas of the Middle East. We know all about Yemen. One of the discoveries I made in the last few months, going back to May, was the decision of the Iranians to supply weaponry and training using Hezbollah through their embassy in Algiers to the Polisario, who are fighting in what's called the Western Sahara. This became such a revolutionary development for the Moroccans that the Moroccans cut diplomatic relations with Iran. Do I think that you can win a war locally with Morocco against Iran, in Algeria, against the Polisario? It has to be done by the Moroccans to protect themselves with the full backing of the United States. But ultimately, the pressure has to be put on Tehran and not on desert units in North Africa.
I think it's an intriguing question. I think most opponents that we face can be deterred. Depends how committed you are. If you show real strengths in their face, you can deter them. And once you deter them, that's the interesting point here. Once you deter them, there is a chance that they will have to, or that they and their constituency will have to reconsider their policy altogether. That's what's happening right now in Iran, for example, in my mind. So the Iranian people ask themselves this question: This was an ideology that was promising us divine victory. Where is this divine victory? We can hardly live. And the real is 140,000 per US dollar. So it's, there's a question about this divine victory. What was presented this morning here, I think it was Fiamma mentioned it, that when there was an appeasement approach, the generals of Hitler said, okay, he's such a great guy. It works. This ideology does work. When they're faced with a real opposition, with readiness to strike against them, then they have to reconsider. Today we have a strange situation. When they look at us and the United States, they are in a state of fear about what's expecting them. They still have some hope in Europe. That is fading away gradually, but they still have some hope in Europe. And when the German foreign minister says we should make an effort to support the Iranian, to keep the Iran deal alive, it's some sort of a last star in the skies. But if they see a very clear attitude from the West, saying no capability to produce nuclear weapons is going to be allowed to you, they will. The regime is going to be in danger. Not only the deal is going to be in danger, the regime is going to be in danger.
Most of the discussion we've had here in the second session regarding the lessons learned from Munich have to do with the type of appeasement versus deterrence opposite a defined enemy and defined battlefields. Where I heard Ambassador Gold mention in lessons learned from his point of view, and Cooper, from your point of view, the Trojan horse, Ambassador Gold talked about exposing your enemy, exposing them as opposed to just defending yourself, has to do with what I think we haven't handled, which is the strategic appeasement that Israel has engaged in the last 25 years opposite the PLO, in which Israel has not only appeased its enemy, it has actually transformed its enemy into what is today perceived as a more legitimate international actor in many circles than Israel itself. Just to note Ambassador Gold's statement about UNRWA in Jerusalem and other claims in Jerusalem. So Israel finds itself, after 2.5 decades, in a situation of strategic appeasement that one might call political replacement theology, in which Israel's arch enemy, by its own declaration, has replaced Israel as, in many circles in the West, as the legitimate player. How do you handle that? How do you walk back, if you accept the premise of my question, that type of strategic, self-destructive, fundamentally self-destructive appeasement, legally, economically, diplomatically, politically, psychologically, and there are more and more categories?
Yeah, please.
If I can follow up on Dan's excellent question. About 25 years ago, almost to the day, September 3rd, 1993, Amos Oz celebrated the Oslo Accords in an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post. And he basically, I'm paraphrasing now, basically called on the Israeli peace camp to become the new right and to monitor those accords, to hold Arafat and the PLO's feet to the fire. They obviously failed miserably. If we can take a look back in retrospect, in other words, not go in the 1993-2018 direction, but look back from our perspective now, what would you have suggested then in September 1993 to make sure that this wasn't a process of appeasement, that this could have been a more meaningful agreement?
Okay. This is a very, very complex question. In 1993, there was no discussion at all about what the government or what Rabin wanted, Paris, even. And the intelligence agencies at all didn't know about all the contacts that were held. And never has the question of what do we want from the Palestinians was raised at all. Never. At the Knesset, Rabin said that, he put as a first priority the peace agreement with the Palestinians, and then it was with the Syrians. But in the meantime, from 1992 to 1993, it was dancing on a rope, once with the Syrians and once with the Palestinians. Once with the Syrians, the Americans were pushing hard to go on the Syrian path. They said that there is an address in Damascus. He is a responsible guy. One shot hasn't been shot in the Golan since 1974. Why should you go to the Palestinians? And in fact, the Americans were mad, dead mad, when we arrived to sign the agreement in Washington. I remember Martin Indyk shouting at us, "What did you do? Where are you going?" Nobody knew where. Now, I was at the time, as the Cooper said, the policy advisor, and we were just rewriting the speech because we were also surprised. I knew about the contacts only in August, 16th of August 1993, and then 13th of September was the signature of the agreement. So barely 3 weeks, and in 3 weeks everything was finished. So it was. The idea was, when we think about it, the first Lebanese war was held because of what? Begin had signed an agreement, a peace agreement with the Egyptians. And one of the chapters of the peace agreement was autonomy for the Palestinians. When he came back to Israel, he was attacked by his own party. "You're crazy. What did you do? On what did you sign? Autonomy for the Palestinians?" And we began seeing, we used to say the PLO outside and PLO inside. From the Arafat was just playing with the local leadership, and the idea came to Israel. To some leadership, say, if we have to have a light autonomy light, we have to crush the head of the snake in Beirut. And this was, in fact, the trigger. We went to Beirut in order to get a light autonomy. And in fact, what we did was to try to ask Arafat, to compel Arafat to leave Beirut to Tunis. And the Labour government brought him back from Tunis, not to an autonomy light, but to a possible state. This is what happened. Now, if you look at the historical perspective, this is completely illogical. You are bringing your own enemy at home. You are bringing him inside and say, "Okay, please sit with us." Do you really believe that Arafat wanted peace? He wanted. I remember one of the nights in Tunis, 3:00 in the morning. He said, "Jacques, why don't we think about a possible rotation? I would be once your president, you, and then somebody else will be president." I said, it's a very interesting idea. The thing is there. That we had our thoughts. Our thoughts was the Paris guys were sitting there and laughing and said, "Okay, now we can we can put Paris as a candidate for a Nobel Prize." They thought, really, they believed that there's a quid pro quo here. We will give him Gaza and Jericho, and we'll keep the West Bank for us. This is what they had. So the whole thing now you're asking, it's impossible to go backwards. It's impossible. You have just to limit the damage control all the time. This is what we can do. If you don't pronounce yourself and say, "Okay, what do you want? What do you want to do?" And as Cooper said, there's a lot of nuances that you can between the black and white. Then you have to decide to let history just drift you on the current. And this is not exactly what everybody would like.
I would like to address this question. What would I advise? Because this was an advice that was given to Rabin. But Rabin misunderstood the advice. After the DOP in 1993 was finished, Rabin understood that something goes wrong here. And he said, what do I get in return? I give the Palestinians all kinds of things, and what do I get in return? So he came up with this idea of the letter. And Jacques knows better than I do the details. But they came up with this idea of the letter from Arafat to Rabin, in which he was supposed to write that he accepts the right of Israel to exist in security and peace. But what he should have asked, and we are stuck with it until today, is for Arafat to write that he accepts Israel's right to exist in security and peace as the nation state of the Jewish people.
Yeah, but
wants to add democratic, no problem. As the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. That was the problem. And this mistake, all these things that you're talking about, all this replacement theory, are the results of the negligence of Rabin at that time. He made a mistake.
Joel.
Yes, I would like to return to 2 points which I made in the morning. And I think that our siach, our discussion about Oslo and also appeasement, is entering into a new stage, and it's very favorable. We have introduced the idea of the accountability of our leaders. Let's say until now, our leaders were considered beyond criticism and accountability. And Rabin was a saint like the Holy Father. One couldn't touch him or discuss his shortcomings, and we remember that he believed, I don't know whether he believed, but he talked a lot about reversibility, and that was a point that you made. And the other point which I mentioned this morning is what the Germans call Vergangenheitsbewältigung. In other words, facing up to the past. It may be ugly. We missed out on having a decent history of the Yom Kippur War, a decent and honest history. We still are entitled to a decent and honest history of Oslo. And in order to mend the mistakes that we have made, we have to understand our history inside and out and honestly.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody. I think that this session was very, very interesting, at least for me. I hope that the same for you. And we'll meet on other occasions. Shana Tova for everybody.